we've got Congressman Phil Rowe from Tennessee. Congressman, it's great to have you aboard.
Hey, Brett, thanks. It's great to be on. Good talking to you again.
Well, congratulations on your reelection, and congratulations on the good work you're doing in this new term of the Congress.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back, and always good to have an election behind you, but I've been very blessed where I am, and the voters have been very supportive. I'm really appreciative of how they've treated me.
Well, and that's a good thing, because we need more gentlemen like you in Congress and less of those who aren't as adhering to the Constitution and working so hard as you do.
We're going to talk. Hopefully, we'll have a chance, Brett, here in a minute to talk about. You brought up the Constitution in North Korea. I spent 13 months tucked up next to the DMZ in Korea 40 years ago as a young Army captain, and in a 2nd Infantry Division, 2nd Medical Battalion, and it was a dangerous place then. It's even more dangerous now.
Well, let's go right into it then.
You know, the thing that I was in Korea, I went back, and I think the thing that astonished me the most, last June, I went back and visited, was right at the same post, Camp Casey. I was at Camp Bradley down at Uijeonbu. So in various places, most of the time I was spent up near the DMZ, and obviously an unstable time in the early 70s at the end of Vietnam, and all our assets were focused on Vietnam at that time. But here's a country I went back to 40 years later, and when I was there as a young soldier, there was a military dictatorship there. There was a country digging out of the Korean War, recovering from the Korean War. And the Prime Minister spoke here in Washington, I guess a year and a half or so ago, since now a new Prime Minister, but he made the point, he said, look, we knew we had to use education to kind of bring our country up. And what really amazed me was 1960, that country had the same economic output as Afghanistan. Afghanistan today is the 4th poorest country in the world. I visited there twice, going back again, hopefully in the not-too-distant future. And Korea is the 9th or 10th largest economy in the world. They have a free people, and the largest Christian church in the world is in Seoul, Korea. It validated my service in the military. I said, you wonder as a young soldier, you're away from your family, you're away from your friends, you think, did it make any difference that I served? Unequivocally, after that trip, I can say it absolutely did. They're a strong ally. There are 50 million free people because of what this country did. I'm very proud of that. And we've got North Korea, just to show you the difference between what a free people can do, is that the average South Korean is 7 inches taller than the average North Korean, and that's nutritional. It's just the food, the nutrition, the lifestyle that these folks have, and there's nothing different. They're the same people separated on the 38th parallel by a demilitarized zone, and the way of and the type of government they have. And boy, if you don't think it makes a difference about how you're governed, it absolutely does.
Now, all excellent points. We actually had yesterday, most of our show was driven on the discussion of North Korea and Asia. We were lucky enough to have Gordon Chang with Forbes.com join us, who's an expert in that area. And the discussion was on the 3rd test of a nuclear bomb in North Korea. And what is even more troubling is the fact that there seems to be a trend of Iranian diplomats and scientists or others who have been participating in these tests in North Korea. And, of course, we're all concerned of the path that Iran seems to be on. And we draw these parallels, and the question would be, what is our Congress and what is this administration doing, or what steps should they be taking at this point to face the threat of, one, a growing nuclear program in North Korea, and, of course, the introduction of a weaponized nuclear program in Iran?
Well, we've already let the cat out of the bag in North Korea. They have a nuclear weapon, probably a couple of nuclear. Some have estimated as many as 5 nuclear weapons. So they have nuclear weapons. The question I ask everybody is, does anybody in the world think that the world will be safer if Iran has a nuclear weapon? The answer is no. It will be very destabilizing. The worry is, will a terrorist organization, Hezbollah, another terrorist organization, get their hands on this weapon? It's a complete game changer. And I think you have to ask now what the Congress can do. The commander-in-chief is the President of the United States, and that's who has to have the spine, the backbone to prevent this from happening. The Iranian people are good people. I've met many of them, know many of them as friends. Their administration is terrible. And you have to separate the two. They're good people in Iran, and I went to college with a lot of folks from Iran, met them, have friends from Iran. And the problem with it is they have a government now that is not good, and I think allowing them to develop a nuclear weapon, whatever we have to do to prevent that, the world will be safer.
Well, I definitely agree with that. And you actually bring up a great point, because I think that around the world there are many of us just, regular everyday people who have friends from all parts of the world, including myself. I have neighbors from all over former Soviet USSR.
Yeah.
And I'm now friends with many of these people, and they were just adversaries, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we have to figure out a path to the people being able to coexist with one another, and governments being more responsible to one another and more cooperative instead of provocative.
Well, and more responsible.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that I think North Korea and Iran have been very provocative in many ways, not just with us, but with other nations and other regions as well.
Oh, no question, Brett. And the problem is more responsive to their own people. I mean, how can you look and see that you have a population that are starving to death? I mean, they literally are starving to death. And what are you doing? Now, not in Iran, but in North Korea. And so what are you doing? You're spending your resources building a bomb for what? To protect yourself from what? You've got China on one side that's not going to invade. They don't have any reason to do that. You've got South Korea. Certainly they're not going to. I mean, they have everything to lose in South Korea. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, why do I need, as a little country like that with 20 million people, why do you need a nuclear bomb to protect yourself from nothing? So that's why government does matter. And right now, both of those are very, very hostile, unstable governments.
Yeah, and with regards to North Korea, obviously they've been a problem for many decades with a very strong military. In fact, that's pretty much all they spend their money on. But two things. One, they've been transferring a lot of weapons to other regions in the world. And the other major concern now is that as they advance their rocket technology, the capabilities of them actually reaching North American continent with nuclear missiles is of the greatest concern right now.
Yeah, it doesn't make President Reagan in the 80s, who talked about Star Wars and the defense, it doesn't make that look too bad now, does it? Where you can shoot a missile down. And, I mean, people were making fun of him in the 80s, the press especially was, about how he was off track and wasn't in touch with reality. Well, it looks to me like he was very in touch with reality, because we have that capacity now to shoot down, and thank goodness we do have the technology to do that, Brett.
No, I think one of the unfortunate incident that transpired recently between the Gaza Strip and Israel, one thing we did learn is the fact that the newer weapon systems are capable of shooting rockets out. And I think as those types of systems are advanced and put into the theater of operation, both, more for defensive purposes, of course, but I think that's a outstanding way to go, and we should definitely be spending more money and encouraging the advancement of those types of systems.
No, there's no doubt about it, and especially in today's world. And look, we've got Pakistan with 50 to 100 nuclear weapons, and I just saw a poll the other day where America has a 4% approval rating in Pakistan. 4%. I mean, that is unbelievable, and that's I just read that this week.
Yeah, and you have to question those kind of polls. Not the poll itself, but the fact that we contribute. I mean, I understand that they're upset that we're in the region. They could be upset for many reasons, because their goals are obviously different from ours. But the fact that we provide so much aid and financial support and even military assistance and weapons, in fact, to so many of these countries, you would think that they'd appreciate that a little bit more.
Yeah, Brett, I think the problem is that it never gets to the people. I think the money that's sent, I think that's the problem. It gets into the military establishment or into the particular dictator, whomever it is, Hamid Karzai, whomever, but it never, the real assets never filter down to the guy on the street, and I think that's where we lose.
Yeah, I was reading up on, there was a report from the Washington, let me get the title correct here, From the Washington Institute, they had delivered a report recently to a hearing in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Committee on Foreign Relations, and they were touching on a lot of problems. The idea of some sort of a peace settlement between Israel and the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, and talking about some of the difficulties that have been involved. And I bring this up because also in the news cycle today there was an assassination of an Iranian guard commander in Syria. I'm sorry. Well, it wasn't clear if it was in Syria
Lebanon,
or on the way to Lebanon. Yeah, I didn't see that exactly. But I think when you draw all these together, here we are. We're trying to come up with a solution as a country, and dealing with other nations as well and other systems, whether it be the UN or NATO or whatever. Trying to come up with resolutions to some of these serious and difficult situations we have in so many regions. And I don't know. To me, it gets more frightening as you pay attention to the news cycles, because the news is getting worse, and it seems that these regions are becoming more destabilized.
I don't disagree. If you look at the so-called Arab Spring, at what happened in all across Libya and Tunisia, Egypt. Listen, that's a very unstable place. Now, you can see Egypt is just a few short of blowing up. I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty in that country right now, and obviously that's of a huge concern. I think, fortunately, the military has a lid on most of it over there, which you don't know how much command and control the prime minister has over, in other words, the Muslim Brotherhood has over the military. And the military has been what's kept the lid on things so far, but who knows how long that can or will last.
Well, Congressman, that's an enormous worry, the fact that you brought up that we provide a lot of money, for example, in the past, and in many of these cases we're providing it to the regime, which often suppresses their people and then is supported through the military. And it seems to me there's two challenges that we have here. One is we're so often having to send or sell military weapons to people who, like Egypt, that I would consider an extraordinarily unstable and, at minimum, hostile, potentially, overtly hostile regime to America, at minimum to America's partners. So one of the questions I would have you from a government standpoint is, why don't we make a greater effort at coming up with contracts where some of these countries actually pay America to support them? In other words, provide a military umbrella. So if they're buying the equipment, but they're really doing is they're leasing military services for us. It would seem to me that both in places like South Korea, they could certainly afford it. As you pointed out, their economy has grown exponentially in the recent decades.
Yeah, I think the one, John, the one issue I might take with that is that I think the American people are tired of us being the world's policemen. And I think there's a lot of pushback. I for one, you'll not find any more supportive than our troops on the ground. But one of the things on the State of the Union address I agreed with the President on is that it is time to pack up and come home from Afghanistan. I think that we have, having been there, put my feet on the ground, been out to Jalalabad, many of the forward operating bases our troops are in. Unless we're willing to make a 50 or 100-year commitment, and I thought that 3 years ago when I was there, and a year and a few months ago when I was there again, I hadn't changed my mind. There had been progress. I don't want to put such a cloud on. There has been great progress. I could see in the year and a half difference that the Afghanistan had improved dramatically, and just little things that you wouldn't think about in Kabul. There were a lot more lights on, and you could see businesses begin to flourish. So good things had happened. I don't mean to paint such a dark cloud, but boy, there's such a cultural rift and divide. It seems like it's not doable to me, and I think that we've invested a lot in that country. I think the strategy to get out is one that I'd support.
Well, I think we may be mixing apples and oranges. So I support, absolutely. I don't like long war and engagements. I believe in quick, dirty, break it, get out, and then try to repair. But I'm thinking more about the situation with North and South Korea, and we basically have an armistice. Legally, it's basically
still a war,
right? So we're still at war.
Yeah.
And China, is clearly complicit in supporting or enabling at least their North Korea's interests. So the question is, were all these years that we're supplementing the military, all of our men and women in uniform, like yourself, who serve on that border in Korea, when you served, Korea couldn't afford it, but now Korea could afford, at minimum, they could afford to be paying for the fact that American troops are there. I have no idea what they're paying.
Yeah, I don't know either, and our presence has obviously been reduced, and we're backing off the DMZ, and that's the strategy to do, although we're still there right now. But I don't disagree with that, John. I think that's a reasonable thing to do, to ask, hey, look, we have a huge budget deficit here. Many of you have a budget surplus. You need to kick in if we're going to be there and be your demilitarized zone for you.
Exactly, and I didn't mean that we should become a mercenary force by any means. But there's a follow-on to that, which I found particularly troubling too, and this is why I asked the question about supplying weapons versus supporting them and having them help cover the cost. From what I understand, the South Koreans have now turned to the Russians to help them build their next generation launch rockets and so forth, as opposed to America. That to me is a very troubling trend when I think about the evolving friends and foes and how important it is to maintain a strong relationship and a technology-based relationship with our allies.
I agree with that. I think probably the close proximity. Look, Korea, the South Koreans that I talk to, and I probably of any foreign country in the world, I know those folks better than any because of the time I spent there. But they are very, very pro-American. The people we talk to on the street, look, they're free, and certainly a generation of my age understands why they are. And you unfortunately, when you're young, you have to relearn everything again. I was in a school when I was there. I went to a South Korean school, and they were being simultaneously taught in English and in Korean by an American instructor and a Korean instructor who was fluent in English. So they have very close ties to America. I don't see that changing.
Yeah, I hope not. I just worry a bit about the trends. If I may, I want to take you briefly to the State of the Union address, and I hope you know.
Do we have to?
Well, it hurts. I know it hurts just thinking about it, right? Do you know a good doctor? But the question I have for you is that the president, as he said, he talked about, of course, how he reduced deficits, which is, of course, ironic, because you spend increased by 2 and then claim to have somehow reduced. But he made the statement about reducing the cost of laying claim to reducing the cost of medical. And from everything that I've checked, and especially with all the business associates I know in the startup technology world, it seems like the cost has actually jumped significantly this year. Do you know what the actual numbers are in the increase?
I do, and I became so flabbergasted by 2 comments. That was one, I couldn't stand it yesterday. I went to the House floor, and 2 of us talked for an hour about this. So it was astonishing to me. And Brett and John, the problem, I've only been here 4 years. As we've talked on your show before, I spent 31 years just taking care of folks, and I finally got so frustrated with the way our country was going, I decided I'm going to go try to get myself in the U.S. Congress and make some difference. And the biggest problem with the healthcare system in America 4 years ago and 5 and 6 years ago, I could see it was cost. It cost too much to come to see me. It cost too much to go to the hospital, and just working people out there like I came from. My father's a factory worker, made shoe heels all of his life. Mother was a bank teller. It's getting out of the realm of where you can afford it, that those folks could afford it. And what the president said, it's cost, and if you pass this Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, you're going to save $2,500 a year. Well, the problem with it is it's gone up at least $4,500, and I saw an estimate the other day from an actuary that said he thought that in 4 years, in 2016, that the essential benefits package, that's a basic package that you'll have to purchase for a family of 4, will be $20,000. Well, I mean, great goodness, a per capita income in Tennessee, where I live, at least the part where I live, is about $33,000 a year. No one in the world is going to be able to afford it.
That's a very good point. Congressman, I read your response to your weekly column to the State of the Union address, and I thought you raised some excellent points. Let me just throw a couple at them. One is your thoughts on education, that, of course, the people making decisions should be the people who are most closely involved, and that's the teachers and the school administrators, not the federal government. And the other thing is and I hadn't even thought about the fact that it is almost 70 years that our unemployment has been this high for so long, and that is incredibly troubling.
It is, and look, education, and we had a subcommittee hearing yesterday on distance learning, and we're doing some really incredible things in Tennessee with distance learning in the mountains, where a child in a small high school, maybe 50 or 60 students, can take calculus or Chinese or whatever from another high school and get credit for it. And it's working unbelievably well. There are two, I think, Brett and John, two big issues. One, the inner city schools, which my wife taught in Memphis for 3 years, so I have some experience with that years ago. That's a different metric than, say, a rural school system is. So what we're doing here in Washington is trying to take one size fits all. It doesn't. There are different challenges in New York City or Newark, New Jersey than there are in Johnson City, Tennessee, or Grassy Fork, Tennessee. They're two different issues. So we've got to let the folks on the ground, and then they've got to be held accountable. You've got to make sure that they produce. Let me give you an example. In Detroit, Michigan, and I don't want to pick on them, but 7% of 8th graders can read at a grade level. That's a failed system. 4% of these kids can do math at grade level. You have to do something different there.
Yeah, and that's as scary as it gets with those numbers.
It is. And 76, that's the good news. 76% of kids don't graduate from high school in that school system.
Yeah, I want to share something very scary here in New Jersey, that we're spending on average somewhere between, say, $15,000 and $30,000 per student, depending on where they're located, per each student. That's under, grade school, K through 12. And to me, I mean, that's equivalent to what we're spending on health care. So to me, we could afford to send our kids to school and health care, but nothing else.
Well, you could have a $15,000 to $30,000 per student. You could have a private education for all those kids for that kind of money, and you should demand something for that, Brad. I mean, that's unacceptable. If those kids are not getting the education they need, that is absolutely unacceptable, and we have to do something, because the education is. I mean, I wouldn't be a physician. I wouldn't be in Congress had I not had the opportunity to do a good public education. And, I mean, you should be able to get the absolute very best in the world. We had a guy yesterday that's out in California, took 90% free and reduced lunch kids, and they are achieving at a phenomenal level. So it can be done, but it takes a lot of hard work, and it's not just money. It's commitment to make sure that, and I didn't agree with all this No Child Left Behind, and I could spend an hour talking about the bad parts, but the concept of, look, every kid deserves a chance to get a decent education. That's fair. I totally agree. How we went about it, I don't agree with, but the concept is good.
No, and I agree with you. And I mean, I think education should be being discussed in Washington, but they should be trying to encourage the states to do a better job, or the cities to do a better job, not dictating from a centralized education.
I mean, how arrogant it is of me to be sitting on a diocese here in Washington, D.C., to try to tell a classroom teacher in New Jersey how to teach he or she to teach their class. That's ridiculous. I mean, the people there know the problems. They know, as I said, it's different there than it would be where I live. And the people there are smart people in those school systems that can do the job if we'll get out of their way. But then we have to demand accountability. I think you have to, if you're going to invest that kind of money, $15,000 to $30,000, the taxpayers certainly deserve results for that.
Well,
and mainly the students do.
Right. I think I have the solution, a very simple one, and I know your time's short, so I'll let you run after this. But Dr. Carson responded to Ben Carson responded to the State of the Union address. He said it's very simple. If all people, low, middle, and higher income, all paid taxes at the same level, meaning if you made $100, you paid 10%. If you make $1 million, you pay 10%. Then everybody is paying something, putting something into the kitty. And so when the federal government does things that they don't agree with, they're being harmed by it, and they will hold the federal government accountable. And I think I think the fact is that these cities or certain people are being failed at a greater rate because they're not holding the government as accountable because they're not really paying a cost for it.
Skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. I think they would think of things differently.
They want some value for their money. One quick thing before you let me go.
Sure.
I've got this. I had to say something about this, and at a future time, I want to talk about the NLRB and the Constitution. But
yes,
I think we held a hearing this week, and it is a huge deal. But anyway, this thing about how the president started talking about China and all this green business. Well, I looked this up. 16 of the 20 most polluted cities in the world are in China. On the Beijing air quality from 0 to 500, that's parts per billion. They were at 755. They were off the scales. They're building a coal-fired power plant every week and have 363 more on the plan, and they emit 2 times as much CO2 as we do. And he's holding them up as for green energy. I'm thinking, what in the world did he see that I didn't see when I was there?
That's a great point. And I could just say this. I'm glad that 16 of those cities are now in China and not in New Jersey because they used to be.
They used to be. Well, we had one here in Tennessee, and it's not. It's better. There's no question. We've made and to clean up the environment, we should do. There's no reason in the world that we should be destroying our planet. I couldn't agree more. But to hold China up as an example was a stretch by any means.
Absolutely. Well, Congressman Phil Rowe from the great state of Tennessee, the 1st District, thank you so much for joining us, and you have yourself a wonderful weekend.
I'll do it. Thanks a lot, John. Brett.
Take care. Well, folks, that was Congressman Phil Rowe from Tennessee in the 1st District. He will be joining us on a regular basis, and if you enjoyed what you heard from that conversation, you will certainly enjoy his future visits.